Walk into any modern American supermarket on a Friday afternoon, and your brain is immediately bombarded with an overwhelming signal of pure, unadulterated abundance. Endless, glowing aisles, spotless floors, bright overhead lighting designed to eliminate every shadow. Between 30,000 and 40,000 individual stock-keeping units sitting on the shelves, representing more product variety under a single commercial roof than an entire 18th century metropolis could access in a decade. Look at the checkout lanes. They never stop moving. Carts heaped with prime cuts of beef, organic produce, imported wines, and brand-name cereals pass by the scanners in a relentless assembly line of consumer commerce. If you stand near the entrance and run the mental math, the business looks like an absolute fortress of cash generation, and the top-line numbers appear to back up that exact illusion. A standard, fully scaled American supermarket pulls in roughly $712,000 every single week. Multiply that across 52 weeks, and a single grocery store in a suburban strip mall is dragging in close to $37 million in gross annual revenue. $37 million. From one physical building, sitting on a couple of acres of asphalt in an ordinary town, it feels like a license to print money. Here is the brutal financial reality. Almost none of that money belongs to the person whose name is on the land title. Supermarkets are not high-margin businesses. They have never been high-margin businesses, and they will never be high-margin businesses. They are high-velocity, capital-intensive logistics operations that happen to wear a retail costume. They exist in a terrifying mathematical universe where companies survive on fractions of a single cent. While software giants enjoy net margins of 30% and luxury fashion brands mark up leather bags by 500%, the entire retail food industry operates on an average net profit margin floating between 1 and 3%. In a typical operational year, the average food retailer walks away with a net profit margin of roughly 1.7%. Let that sink in for a moment. Do the arithmetic on that impressive $37 million in annual top-line revenue. After paying off the entire supply chain, the energy grid, the landlord, the tax collector, and the army of hourly employees, the owner of that multi-million-dollar building walks away with roughly $629,000. When a customer stands at the register and hands over a crisp $100 bill, the store owner keeps less than $1.70 of it. Every single other dollar from that transaction flows straight out the back door to the farmer, the industrial distributor, the freight logistics carrier, the food packaging conglomerate, the local electric utility, and the commercial real estate landlord. If you want to own a supermarket, the very first thing you must do is incinerate your conventional retail mindset. This is not a business where you buy an item for $5 and mark it up to $10. Nobody gets rich selling a can of soup at a 50% margin, because if you try, the discounter 2 miles down the road will vaporize your customer base by sunrise. The true operational art of the grocery business is moving millions of pounds of highly perishable, physically fragile, low-margin merchandise through a concrete box faster than it spoils, faster than it gets stolen, and faster than the financial interest on your short-term debt eats you alive. Walk into any modern American supermarket on a Friday afternoon, and your brain is immediately bombarded with an overwhelming signal of pure, unadulterated abundance. Endless glowing aisles, spotless floors, bright overhead lighting designed to eliminate every shadow. Between 30,000 and 40,000 individual stock-keeping units sitting on the shelves, representing more product variety under a single commercial roof than an entire 18th century metropolis could access in a decade. Look at the checkout lanes. They never stop moving. Carts heaped with prime cuts of beef, organic produce, imported wines, and brand-name cereals pass by the scanners in a relentless assembly line of consumer commerce. If you stand near the entrance and run the mental math, the business looks like an absolute fortress of cash generation, and the top-line numbers appear to back up that exact illusion. A standard, fully scaled American supermarket pulls in roughly $712,000 every single week. Multiply that across 52 weeks, And a single grocery store in a suburban strip mall is dragging in close to $37 million in gross annual revenue. $37 million. From one physical building, sitting on a couple of acres of asphalt in an ordinary town, it feels like a license to print money. Here is the brutal financial reality. Almost none of that money belongs to the person whose name is on the land title. Supermarkets are not high-margin businesses. They have never been high-margin businesses, and they will never be high-margin businesses. They are high-velocity, capital-intensive logistics operations that happen to wear a retail costume. They exist in a terrifying mathematical universe where companies survive on fractions of a single cent. While software giants enjoy net margins of 30% and luxury fashion brands mark up leather bags by 500%, the entire retail food industry operates on an average net profit margin, floating between 1 and 3%. In a typical operational year, the average food retailer walks away with a net profit margin of roughly 1.7%. Let that sink in for a moment. Do the arithmetic on that impressive $37 million in annual top-line revenue. After paying off the entire supply chain, the energy grid, the landlord, the tax collector, and the army of hourly employees, the owner of that multi-million-dollar building walks away with roughly $629,000. When a customer stands at the register and hands over a crisp $100 bill, the store owner keeps less than $1.70 of it. Every single other dollar from that transaction flows straight out the back door to the farmer, the industrial distributor, the freight logistics carrier, the food packaging conglomerate, the local electric utility, and the commercial real estate landlord. If you want to own a supermarket, the very first thing you must do is incinerate your conventional retail mindset. This is not a business where you buy an item for $5 and mark it up to $10. Nobody gets rich selling a can of soup at a 50% margin, because if you try, the discounter 2 miles down the road will vaporize your customer base by sunrise. The true operational art of the grocery business is moving millions of pounds of highly perishable, physically fragile, low-margin merchandise through a concrete box faster than it spoils, faster than it gets stolen, and faster than the financial interest on your short-term debt eats you alive. So, what does it actually cost to buy your way into this low-margin arena? If you think you can start on a shoestring budget, you are stepping straight into a financial landmine. There is a ladder of entry costs in this industry, and the bottom rungs are a complete illusion. You could, in theory, open a tiny neighborhood corner store for around $100,000, but that buys you a couple hundred square feet, 2 glass-door beverage coolers, and barely enough inventory to look like a legitimate enterprise. It will never generate supermarket-level cash flow, and it leaves you completely exposed to wholesale price shocks. To construct a genuine, full-scale, independent supermarket one, equipped with a fresh produce hall, an artisan butcher counter, a full-service bakery, and enough parking space to handle peak weekend traffic, you are looking at a total capital expenditure ranging between $3.5 million and $16 million, depending entirely on your geographic real estate market. And real estate is precisely where the first invisible cost ambushes your balance sheet. Commercial retail lease rates for prime anchor tenant space in an average American shopping center hover around $24 per square foot annually. If you move into a dense, high-income coastal suburban market, that number easily rockets past $60 per square foot. Given that the average footprint of a modern supermarket spans roughly 42,000 square feet, your annual rent check alone can devour anywhere from $1 million to over $2.5 million before you have stocked a single apple or scanned a single box of cereal. Then comes the physical build-out, which is where cash goes to die. Taking a raw commercial shell and converting it into a food-grade operational environment costs anywhere from $400,000 for a minor conversion to $15 million for a ground-up ground lease. Construction in a Tier 1 metro area. And the single most brutal capex item inside that budget is industrial refrigeration. A supermarket is essentially an enormous cooling facility masquerading as a store. Walk-in freezers, multi-deck open-air display cases, high-stage rack compressors, and liquid refrigerant piping lines will easily drain between $250,000 and $750,000 from your bank account. A single commercial walk-in cooler measuring 20 feet by 20 feet can cost upwards of $25,000, and an operational store requires multiple dedicated temperature zones for raw meat, dairy, frozen goods, and delicate produce. Once the refrigeration grid is humming, you have to fill the void. Initial opening day inventory just to make the shelves look fully stocked so customers don't suspect you are on the verge of bankruptcy requires between $200,000 and $500,000 in working capital. Commercial gondola shelving, specialty produce displays, deli service cases, and bakery ovens will swallow another $50,000 to $150,000. Enterprise point-of-sale terminals, security camera networks, and digital inventory control systems demand another $30,000 to $120,000. Even a fleet of heavy-duty metal shopping carts will cost you anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000. And then there is the regulatory tax that catches first-time operators completely off guard, the commercial liquor license. In states where alcohol distribution licenses are strictly quota-capped by county population, buying an existing off-premise beer, wine, and spirits license on the open market can cost as little as $15,000 in a rural township, or exceed $400,000 in a competitive urban market. You might be tempted to skip alcohol entirely to save cash, but doing so is operational suicide. Wine and spirits represent one of the highest margin categories in the entire building. Cutting it out means willingly severing your best profit engine before the front doors even open. Once you survive the catastrophic upfront capital expenditure and open the doors, your daily battle against operating expenses begins. And this is where the mathematical trap tightens its grip. Out of every dollar that enters your registers, between 65 and 75 cents goes directly toward the cost of goods, sold the wholesale price you pay to manufacturers and agricultural distributors just to get the product onto your loading dock. That leaves you with a paper-thin gross margin of 25 to 35 cents on the dollar to pay for every single operational cost required to keep the business alive. First on the list of cash drains is labor. Wages, payroll taxes, healthcare, and worker compensation insurance devour between 10 and 16.3% of your total gross sales. But the raw dollar amount tells only half the story. The retail grocery sector suffers from one of the most punishing employee turnover rates in the entire global economy. Annual turnover for part-time hourly supermarket staff averages roughly 40% across independent stores and escalates to a staggering 56% at multi-unit corporate regional chains. Think about what that metric means in practice. Every single year, half of your workforce walks out the door. Every time a cashier, a shelf stocker, or a deli clerk quits, you incur the friction costs of recruiting, interviewing, background checking, onboarding, and training a raw replacement. That endless cycle of administrative churn silently bleeds tens of thousands of dollars out of your cash reserves while permanently depressing operational efficiency on the floor. Second on the OpEx hit list is energy consumption. Supermarkets are among the most energy-intensive commercial structures on the planet, consuming energy at a rate far exceeding standard office buildings or conventional retail outlets. The reason is simple. Industrial refrigeration units run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, without a single second of relief. A standard 40,000 square foot supermarket consumes roughly 51 kilowatt-hours of electricity per square foot annually. Translate that into a monthly utility statement, and you are staring at a yearly electric bill that routinely crosses $230,000. Refrigeration equipment and store lighting alone account for up to 80% of that total power draw. If a heat wave hits your region and local utility peak demand pricing kicks in, Your monthly operating profit can be completely incinerated by the power company before you even pay your landlord. Add another 4 to 10% of revenue for lease obligations and property occupancy taxes, and another 3 to 8% for liability insurance, local marketing, equipment maintenance contracts, technology, software licenses, and private security forces. By the time you reach the bottom line, your operational spreadsheet looks like it has been shredded by an industrial lawnmower. And then comes the silent financial killer that never sends an invoice, never gives advance warning, and never shows up on a purchase order: shrinkage. In the grocery industry, shrink is the polite professional euphemism for inventory that simply vanishes into thin air through employee theft, customer shoplifting, administrative error, or physical spoilage before a customer ever pays for it. Across the supermarket sector, total inventory shrink averages between 1.6 and 3% of total gross sales. To a corporate outsider, a 2% loss rate sounds like a rounding error. But remember the baseline rule of grocery economics: your net profit margin is only 1.7%. When your inventory loss rate exceeds your net profit margin, you are no longer running a retail store. You are running an accidental charity funded by your own equity. Break down that shrink metric, and the reality becomes deeply uncomfortable for operators. Employee theft, ranging from direct cash skimming at the register to employees handing out free groceries to friends through the checkout lane, accounts for a jaw-dropping 42% of all inventory shrink. Losses. The average internal employee theft incident costs a supermarket owner nearly $1,900. External shoplifting accounts for another 37% of shrink, though individual incidents are smaller, averaging roughly $461 per occurrence. The remaining 21% of shrink is caused by administrative blunders, mispriced shelf tags, scanning errors at checkout, and supplier short shipments where you pay for 10 cases of beef on the loading dock but only receive 8. On top of human theft, you have the relentless tax of biological spoilage, which hits fresh departments like in Sledgehammer. The fresh produce department loses an average of 11.6% of its total inventory directly to rot and physical degradation. For highly delicate leafy greens and berries, spoilage rates can easily surge past 60% during supply chain delays. Nationally, American supermarkets throw away an estimated $15 billion worth of unsold spoiled fruits and vegetables every single year. Here is the terrifying math of inventory loss in a 1.7% margin business. If an employee drops a case of imported olive oil, or a shoplifter walks out the front door with $100 worth of ribeye steaks, you do not simply lose $100. To recover that lost $100 of capital out of your net profit, your store must generate more than $5,000 in brand new, fresh top-line sales. $5,000 in extra sales just to erase a single $100 mistake at the loading dock. So, if center aisle dry groceries are low-margin battlegrounds and inventory is constantly rotting or disappearing, how does a supermarket owner actually make a profit? The answer lies in masterclass spatial engineering and product margin arbitrage. Walk into any profitable supermarket, and you will quickly realize that the store is divided into two completely different economic zones: the center aisles and the perimeter. The center aisles, packed with canned vegetables, boxed cereals, bottled sodas, and household cleaning chemicals, are essentially low-margin loss leaders. They exist for one primary structural reason: to pull customers into the building on a predictable weekly cadence. Gross margins in the center aisles are painfully thin, often averaging around 26% before accounting for store operating costs. You do not build wealth selling brand-name canned soup. The real money lives exclusively on the perimeter of the floor plan. Fresh produce carries a gross margin between 30 and 40%, easily offsetting its high spoilage risk if inventory velocity is maintained. The deli and prepared foods counter operates at an even higher gross margin, ranging from 40 to over 50%, because you are no longer selling raw ingredients, you are selling immediate convenience to time-starved suburban consumers. The in-store bakery is frequently the single most profitable square footage in the entire physical building, boasting gross margins that routinely cross 55%. Flour, water, yeast, and sugar cost pennies, but freshly baked sourdough bread fills the entire store with an intoxicating aroma that drives impulse buying across every other department. Meat and seafood maintain solid 25 to 30% margins. And the floral department, which occupies barely 1% of the store's total footprint, generates gross margins near 46%, making it one of the highest revenue-generating uses of space on the property. Alongside perimeter engineering lies the quiet war between national consumer brands and private label store products. National brands like Coca-Cola or Kellogg's are critical because their multi-million-dollar national advertising budgets drive foot traffic into your store. But because those massive consumer packaged goods conglomerates hold tremendous negotiating leverage, they leave the retailer with a modest 26% gross margin. Private label products, the store's house-branded version of those exact same commodities, completely flip the balance of power. By eliminating the national manufacturer's massive marketing overhead and contracting directly with third-party food processors, a supermarket can produce its own private label items at 40 to 50% lower cost than a national brand. The store then prices the private label item 20 to 30% cheaper than the national brand on the shelf, undercutting the big manufacturer while walking away with a gross profit margin closer to 35%. The financial sweet spot for modern grocers is driving private label penetration to between 35 and 40% of total store inventory. Go higher than that, and shoppers feel deprived of choice. Go lower, and you are leaving massive margin on the table every single day. Underneath the physical operations of shelf stocking and cashier management lies a hidden financial engine that allows grocers to generate massive equity returns on tiny margins, the cash conversion cycle. When a customer fills a cart with groceries and steps up to the register, they pay instantly with cash, debit, or credit cards. The supermarket collects its revenue within 24 to 48 hours. However, when the supermarket buys inventory from corporate food distributors or national manufacturers, it negotiates payment terms of net 30, net 60, or even net 90 days. Think about the sheer leverage of that structural delay. The supermarket sells the box of cereal on day 3, collects the cash on day 4, and doesn't have to pay the manufacturer until day 60 or 90. For almost 2 full months, the supermarket sits on an enormous pool of float interest-free capital, funded entirely by its own suppliers. Well-run grocery chains use this perpetual supplier float to fund store expansions, pay down real estate debt, or generate short-term treasury yields without ever borrowing a single dollar from a commercial bank. And to maximize the velocity of that float, grocers engineer store floor plans down to the millimeter using aggressive behavioral psychology. The moment a shopper steps through the sliding glass doors, they enter what store planners call the decompression zone. This is a deliberately open, uncluttered area featuring fresh flowers or vibrant produce. It is designed to slow down the shopper's walking pace, signal absolute freshness, and reset their psychological state before they encounter the main retail grid. Data shows that roughly 9 out of 10 human beings naturally drift to the right upon entering a building. Supermarkets are explicitly designed to capture that bias, guiding foot traffic in a massive counterclockwise loop. Behavioral studies prove that shoppers moving counterclockwise spend roughly $2 to $3 more per visit than shoppers navigating clockwise. Notice where the essential staple items are placed. Sourdough bread, fresh milk, butter, and raw eggs are never placed near the front entrance. They are banished to the absolute farthest corners at the back of the building. To buy a simple gallon of milk, a customer is forced to trek past 400 feet of high-margin impulse displays, bakery cases, and promotional endcaps. Shelf placement is equally ruthless. In the grocery world, eye level is buy level. Products placed at standard adult eye level sell at a dramatically higher rate than identical products placed on the top or bottom shelves. Big consumer brands pay enormous hidden slotting fees, often thousands of dollars per product per store, just to secure prime middle shelf positioning. Meanwhile, lower shelves are strategically stocked with brightly colored sugary cereals angled precisely at the eye level of a toddler sitting in the shopping cart, turning children into unwitting sales agents targeting their parents' wallets. And finally, you reach the checkout aisle, the ultimate psychological trap. Trapped in a narrow lane with nowhere to look while waiting in line, the customer is surrounded by cold beverages, chocolate bars, and magazines. That tiny strip of real estate converts idle waiting time into pure, high-margin impulse purchase revenue. If the traditional supermarket model sounds like a delicate balancing act, modern consumer trends have introduced a whole new vector of operational destruction: digital e-commerce fulfillment. Consider the brutal unit economics of online grocery delivery. When a traditional customer walks into your store, picks $100 worth of groceries off the shelf, carries them to the register, scans them, and drives them home, your store earns roughly $4 in operational net profit. Now take that exact same $100 order placed through a mobile delivery app. The customer pays no extra delivery fee. To fulfill that order, your store must pay an hourly employee to walk the aisles for 20 minutes, handpick 30 individual items, bag them, store them in temperature-controlled holding units, and hand them off to a delivery driver. By the time you factor in the hourly labor, packaging materials, app platform fees, and last-mile delivery logistics, that exact same $100 transaction flips from a $4 net profit into a catastrophic $13 net loss. Every major grocery chain in the developed world is currently trapped in this digital matrix. Customers now demand the convenience of home delivery or curbside pickup, but they fiercely resist paying the true operational cost required to deliver it. The more successful your e-commerce channel becomes, the faster your net operating margin collapses towards zero. Compounding this online friction is the devastating cost of out-of-stock shelves. When a shopper reaches for their favorite brand of coffee and finds an empty shelf tag, over 60% will buy a substitute brand, but 25% will leave the store without buying anything in that category, and over 40% will abandon the store entirely and drive to a competitor down the street. Nationally, stockout events cost food retailers over 4% of their total annual sales. In a business operating on a 1.7% net margin, a 4% revenue loss from inventory stockouts isn't a minor headache, it is an operational catastrophe. And stingingly, up to 90% of shelf stockouts are not caused by supply chain disruptions from manufacturers. They are caused by internal labor failures, store clerks failing to restock the shelves fast enough from the backroom storage area. Throw in macroeconomic inflation, and the fragile machine fractures further. When wholesale food prices surge, store owners are forced to raise shelf prices. But grocery shoppers are exceptionally price-sensitive. When prices rise, consumers immediately trade down, ditching premium organic produce for conventional items, swapping national brands for private labels, or abandoning traditional supermarkets altogether to shop at deep discount chains. An independent supermarket owner does not operate in a vacuum. They exist in a hyper-aggressive ecosystem dominated by predatory retail titans, equipped with structural advantages no single store can ever match. At one end of the spectrum is Walmart, leveraging unmatched global purchasing scale to force consumer goods manufacturers into selling products at wholesale prices that smaller grocers can only dream of. At another end is Costco, which operates on an entirely different financial planet. Costco doesn't care about making a profit on groceries. Over half of Costco's total corporate operating profit doesn't come from selling food at all. It comes straight from recurring annual membership fees, which renew at a staggering 90% rate every single year. Costco can afford to sell fresh meat and produce practically at cost because your $60 annual membership card pays for their corporate overhead. To protect its iconic $4.99 rotisserie chicken, a classic loss leader designed to pull millions of shoppers through the door every week, Costco did something unprecedented. When wholesale poultry prices escalated, rather than raising the shelf price by 50 cents, Costco spent $450 million to build its own massive, vertically integrated poultry processing complex in Fremont, Nebraska. By controlling its own hatcheries, feed mills, and processing plants, Costco processes over 100 million chickens a year, securing a 10 to 35-cent margin savings per bird just to defend a single $4.99 loss leader. At the other end of the competitive battlefield are hard discounters like Aldi and Lidl. These German-born operators strip away every single luxury traditional grocers offer. Instead of 30,000 product options, an Aldi carries just 1,500 core items, 90% of which are private label. Products are displayed directly in their original cardboard shipping boxes on wooden pallets. Stores operate with as few as 4 employees on shift, cross-trained to stock shelves, clean floors, and operate registers. By running an ultra-lean operational machine, Aldi undercuts traditional supermarket prices by 15 to 30%. An independent supermarket attempting to win a direct price war against Walmart, Costco, or Aldi will be financially annihilated within 6 months. The independent operators who survive do so by abandoning price wars, entirely focusing instead on hyper-local specialty products, high-end service counters, and personal customer relationships that a corporate discount warehouse can never replicate. To defend their paper-thin margins against these retail titans, forward-thinking grocery operators are weaponizing advanced technology and vertical integration. Consider the widespread deployment of electronic shelf labels, ESLs. These tiny digital price tags, utilizing low-power electronic ink displays, cost between $5 and $15 per unit. Rolling them out across an entire 40,000 square foot store requires an upfront investment crossing $100,000. That sounds like an enormous capital expenditure for a price tag, until you analyze the operational savings. Digital tags eliminate thousands of labor hours previously wasted by store clerks manually printing, tearing, and swapping paper tags every Tuesday night. More importantly, electronic tags enable real-time dynamic pricing. If a shipment of fresh strawberries is 3 days away from spoiling, the store manager can instantly drop the digital shelf price by 30% across the entire building with a single keystroke, clearing the inventory before it becomes a total loss to spoilage. Simultaneously, predictive artificial intelligence is transforming inventory control. Machine learning algorithms now analyze local weather forecasts, historical holiday purchasing patterns, and neighborhood demographics to automatically trigger store reorders before a shelf ever goes bare, striking directly at the stockout problem. In the backroom, major regional chains are constructing automated micro-fulfillment centers, MFCs. These high-density robotic storage structures attach directly to the rear of physical stores. Autonomous robotic shuttles retrieve items from vertical storage bins and present them to a human packer, enabling the system to assemble a 30-item online order in less than 5 minutes, roughly 5 times faster than a human clerk walking the public aisles. Technology is no longer a luxury in the grocery sector. It is a mandatory defensive shield required to preserve a 1.7% net margin. If you want to understand how unforgiving the economics of this industry truly are, look at the rise and catastrophic fall of the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, better known to generations of Americans simply as A&P. A&P was not some poorly funded regional startup. For decades, A&P was the largest, most dominant retail corporation in the entire world. At its peak in the 1940s, A&P operated over 14,000 stores and controlled roughly 10% of all grocery spending in the entire United States. It was the company that pioneered the modern self-service supermarket format that every grocery store on Earth uses today. It possessed absolute purchasing power, unprecedented national scale, and legendary brand equity. Yet, in December of 2010, A&P filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It restructured, closed hundreds of stores, emerged as a private entity, and attempted to rebuild. Just 4 years later, in July of 2015, the company collapsed into bankruptcy a second time. This time, there was no rescue. 156 years of corporate history was liquidated in a matter of weeks. The real estate was auctioned off to competitors, tens of thousands of workers were terminated, and an iconic American institution simply ceased to exist. How does the empire that literally invented modern grocery retail end up completely liquidated? The answer is a masterclass in structural rigidity. A&P built its 20th century empire on extreme standardization, aggressive cost-cutting, and heavy reliance on low-cost private label goods. But as consumer tastes evolved toward fresh, organic produce, upscale deli experiences, and high-velocity discount formats, A&P remained trapped in its legacy infrastructure. It was burdened by uncompetitive long-term store leases in dying neighborhood locations and crippled by legacy labor union contracts that made operational restructuring impossibly expensive. The exact operational discipline that built A&P in 1930 destroyed it in 2015. In a business operating on a 1 to 3% net profit margin, past success guarantees absolutely nothing. Being good at this business 10 years ago is completely irrelevant. You have to execute the math perfectly every single week, forever, while the ground under your feet never stops shifting. So, when you strip away the bright overhead lights, the glowing produce displays, and the illusion of top-line revenue, what does the financial reality of owning a supermarket actually look like? Let's run two realistic operational scenarios for a standard suburban supermarket pulling in $37 million in gross annual sales. In scenario A, the optimistic operational year, you run a tight ship. Your inventory shrink is locked down at a low 1.5% thanks to vigilant security and disciplined produce management. Your private label mix hits the golden 38% threshold. Your bakery, deli, and floral perimeter departments perform at peak efficiency, and your labor turnover stays below 40%. In a stellar year like this, your net margin touches 2.2%. On $37 million in top-line revenue, your store generates roughly $814,000 in net cash profit. If you operate a scaled network of 3 such stores, your personal owner compensation can comfortably cross $2 million annually. Now, let's look at scenario B, the brutal margin collapse. A wave of local retail theft and employee turnover pushes your shrink rate up to 2.8%. A severe heat wave drives your summer utility bills up by 20%. Supply chain delays force you to throw out thousands of dollars in spoiled fresh produce. When wholesale inflation hits, you raise shelf prices slightly, only to watch 10% of your price-sensitive customer base drift toward an Aldi 2 miles away. Run that exact same $37 million revenue store through scenario B. Your net margin doesn't just drop slightly, it collapses past 0 to negative 0.8%. Even though your registers still process $37 million in sales, your store just lost nearly $300,000 in cash over 12 grueling months. The terrifying truth of the supermarket business is that the difference between generating an $800,000 profit and sustaining a $300,000 loss is not measured in tens of millions of dollars of lost sales. It is measured in a single percentage point of inventory shrink, a fraction of a cent in wholesale procurement, and a handful of operational decisions executed on the retail floor 52 weeks a year. Owning a supermarket is not a romantic culinary venture or a passive real estate investment. It is an unforgiving, high-stress, capital-intensive manufacturing assembly line that operates in reverse. It will demand 80-hour work weeks, absolute operational mastery, and nerves of steel. If you survive, it is because you stopped looking at the carts full of groceries and mastered the brutal math hiding behind fractions of a single cent.